Welcome everyone to Textiles and Tea with the Handweavers Guild of America. I'm Kathy Group. I am the advertising manager and I get to be your host today. We want to thank our sponsors today, Weaving Friends. This is a group of people that get together and they are sponsoring our guest today. Thank you, you all. I appreciate this. We love that kind of support. We will have questions at the end of the program, as always. Please put your questions in the Q&A and not in the chat. We love the chat. Keep those things coming. All your comments are wonderful, but I can't always see the chat. So if you put it in the Q&A, I will definitely see your question. Today, I'm excited. We have Patrice George. Patrice recently retired from the Fashion Institute of Technology, where she was an associate professor in the Textiles Development and Marketing Department for 18 years. She specialized in woven textiles, history of textiles industry, and sustainable solutions for textile production. She fell in love with weaving as a high school exchange student in Sweden. This interest grew at the University of Michigan. She did graduation. She spent a year exploring textiles in India. She studied traditional hand weaving in Sweden. In 1974, she moved to New York City as a hand weaver / designer. In 1979, she founded her studio, Patrice George Designs, specializing in woven fabrics for interiors. Patrice later developed courses in computer-aided woven design for the School of Visual Arts, Parsons, and FIT. She taught digital woven design at the University of Industrial Arts in Helsinki, Finland, as a Fulbright Scholar. She's also worked with global textile development projects in Jamaica, Mexico, and Laos. Welcome. Hi, Patrice. How are you? There she is.
I'm fine. Can you see my video now?
I see you.
Okay. Well, thank you for having me. And thank you to Weaving Friends. I know who you are, and I can't tell you how much I love you and appreciate your support and your nomination for this afternoon. So thank you, thank you, thank you.
Great. We thank them too. They have excellent taste, Patrice. They have excellent taste. Well, let's get started with what is your favorite tea?
Well, my favorite tea is coffee. However, my favorite teas are usually flowery teas. So today, but the most important thing about tea is what I drink it out of. So this is a little teapot I got in Paris, and it is holding fresh chamomile tea made from buds, not from a tea bag. And that's what I'll be sipping today. And I find this very soothing in the afternoon. So I like it very much.
Good. That's a new one. I like that. I don't think we've ever seen a teapot before. So way to go.
Oh, I have hundreds.
New.
We can do a whole textiles and tea and teapots here.
That's right. We talked a little bit at the introduction about you getting started and how you went to Sweden to learn weaving, but can you tell us a little more about how you got started in fiber?
Well, I like to say this is at least my second incarnation and probably my third reincarnation as a weaver. I'm absolutely positive I was alive in the 18th century. My interest in looms confirms that. But in this lifetime, one of my grandfathers was a tailor. And he died when I was very young, but when I visited, I used to play with swatches on the floor. And my other grandfather was a commercial artist. And I believe that those two grandfathers influenced me very, very much, especially the tailor. And all my cousins laugh at me saying I'm the only one who picked up anything of him because everybody else went into nursing or something else. But yeah, thanks to that grandpa. I'm sure that it's in my DNA. And I just fell in love with it from the very beginning. Textiles first, sewing and making things with textiles. And then later on, I remember the day I learned the word textile in second grade when we were talking about the map of the United States. I grew up in Detroit where there was a lot of design influence because we had designers there from all over Europe, but especially Scandinavia, working for the car companies. And we had a very famous school called Cranbrook, which I was quite aware of. So while I didn't know I was going to be a weaver, all of these things were in my life before it finally clicked. So
let's talk some more about how you pursued weaving. I just think it's interesting that it's like you went after weaving. You didn't wait for weaving to come to you. It's like like we taught, you went to India, you went to Sweden, you even went to Connecticut, you know? So what was that driving force behind traveling to find weaving or learn about weaving?
Well, other than Cranbrook, I didn't know of any schools. And when I was in college, well, it started in Sweden. Again, you mentioned that I was an exchange student to Sweden in high school. And one day, the family that I stayed with, who is my second family now, they're very real family, they went to visit a friend of theirs in the country who had a giant loom, and she was weaving linen weave and sew and all the handcrafts, pottery. It was all part of their education. So basically everybody could weave. So this woman couldn't believe that I couldn't. So she just said, well, sit down and weave. And um, that's it. There's a picture of me with the light streaming behind my head and me sitting at this Swedish loom. And I always say that's Saint Vevna, the Swedish God of Weaving, who came down and cursed me. And I just knew after that I had to somehow find a way to get a loom. And an art history major at the University of Michigan, there was a yarn shop that opened near my family's house in the suburbs, and he had a loom. So I said, can you teach me? So I spent 3 days and thought I knew everything. I just formed a sampler, twill, basket weave. I said, I know it all. I'm going to be a weaver. 60 years later, I wonder what I was thinking, but I was so sure that I bought a loom and took it back to college with me and wove all through my senior year. Nearly flunked out of college because I was weaving so much. I think I joined the Weavers Guild, but I'm not sure at the time. But I definitely read every single book on weaving in the Ann Arbor Library. And after that, when I graduated, loved the saris and the textiles. So I decided to go to India. I decided, well, I really don't want to go to Cranbrook because it was just at the time it was turning from from Jack Larson's alma mater to fiber arts, macrame, and it changed from Robert Kidd to Gary Odell, if anybody who knows what that means. So that wasn't the direction I wanted cloth. So I thought India was the place to go to study cloths. So I just traveled around with a friend and still in love with India and still in love with that experience. Yeah.
I think that it's so brave that you did that. I mean, with that in mind of seeking out what you wanted to know. I think that's great that you did that.
Yeah, I think I was crazy and very young and very naive. I wouldn't do it today. Not the same way.
So yeah, I traveled around Europe by myself, and I think of it now and go, oh my gosh, what if something had happened? It's like, you're right. I was young, crazy. It works.
Yeah, absolutely.
This talking about that image, I think we have that image of you at the loom. This is you in Sweden, right?
Yes, 16 years old.
And I was curious if you could compare what was it like to learn to weave the Swedish way in Sweden and then come back to the United States and be involved in weaving here. What was the difference or similarities?
Wow. Yeah, that's very, very interesting question. I went to Sweden because I wanted to learn traditional weaving. I'd already been to India, and in India, I had been introduced to ancient technologies, jacquard looms from the 19th century and pit looms that had been weaving the same sari patterns for hundreds of years and in the same family. And then Sweden was so different because it was really a national culture. And the school I went to, Handarbetets Vänner, was best known because they had a studio that did commission work for public buildings and for, it's really famous. It's still famous. It's like, I think it's 150 years old this year. But in the summer, they had a course that was taught in English. So I learned the basics. I learned how to warp a loom the Swedish way. I learned to weave with wool and linen. Our required projects were a dish towel and a rag rug and a band, ribbons. And I loved it all. But the course was so strict, you could not change the assignment. You couldn't experiment. And what drove me the craziest was that the Swedish looms, as anybody who's ever woven one, are all string tie-ups. And we only had 3 months there, so I couldn't believe we had to spend so much time. Every time we took the loom apart, we had to take all the strings off, including the heddles, and put them back on. So when I got home, I started thinking, there must be some other way to get to weaving faster. So weaving faster sort of became my motto, and also experimenting more. So I actually bought a small Swedish loom and had it delivered, had it sent back to me. I was still living in Michigan, but I soon discovered Maycombers and jack looms and other things. This is before Dobby's, but I discovered that I preferred American looms to Swedish looms, and I preferred experimenting to following strict directions. So, but I still love this traditional craft of Swedish weaving.
Oh, that's interesting. That's interesting. I guess I've never heard people mention that part of the weaving before, but I get the whole thing with the strings. Trust me. Yeah, I get that too.
Yeah.
You also designed for a mill at one time, right? And then you became an independent designer. And so we have an image here of some of the products that you created. And I would imagine that you have to come up with a balance. And I wonder if it's a struggle of your own creativity and what you want to make, but you got to balance that with the limits or limitations of a commercial product. Is that true, or?
Well, it's partly true. It just depends on what you consider your work. I mean, I moved to New York in '74, and almost my reasons for moving to New York, I was inspired by Nell Zamnorowski, who is professor emeritus at FIT. Unfortunately, she's no longer with us, but she was a very well-known weaver and wrote the book Step by Step Weaving, which was my first weaving book. So I contacted Nell, wrote to her a letter, this is pre-internet, and said, hi, I'm a weaver. I've been studying in Sweden. I've been doing this and that. Sherry Smith, who had just arrived at Michigan also, I visited her, and she worked in the industry before she became a full-time professor. And she gave me some advice on how to put together a portfolio. And the other advice she gave me was, she gave me 3 building names. Back then, all the textile people were in the same buildings, and said, just go knock on door to door and say you want to show them your portfolio. Don't say you want a job. So I tried that. I came to New York with the portfolio that I had put together, and all my yarns were from the yarn stores I worked at. Anybody's fan from Ann Arbor, I worked at the Wild Weft for 3 years. I founded the yarn store for the University of Michigan. And people would look at my portfolio, I guess that was a normal thing to do, and say, well, great, where did you get all your yarns? And I said, why are they asking that? So I went to FIT and talked to Nell, and she said, yes, everything you have here is very heavy. So I think you shouldn't be looking in the fashion business. You should be looking in the home textiles business. So she gave me the name of a couple of people that she knew who would know her name if I said Nell sent me. And the second one I walked into said, oh, I know somebody who needs a weaver because they have a weaver who went on a 1-week vacation 3 weeks ago. So I think you should go see them. They're right around the corner. So I went over to see them, and they said, oh my God, you're just what we need. As soon as that guy comes back, we're going to fire him and hire you. That's how I got my first job. So I worked for that mill. It was in Georgia. It was in Elberton, Georgia. It was Kohama Decorative Fabrics for 4 years. And I learned so much there. I always consider that my substitute for going to a school, because we had Jacquard, we had Dobby, we had print people. I got to go to the mill. I got to learn what it was like to be a mill worker. So I became very sensitive to all of the people who it takes to make a commercial product. And I never found that it was a conflict with my own design, because I was given a challenge, like, okay, come up with a new line of striped cotton upholstery. And I could basically do it at anything I wanted, but I was under constant feedback. And I also learned that to do customer market research, you look at what your customers have been buying. You look at what the market's at, you look at what the trends are. So all of those things are part of designing commercially. It's not just, I think this is wonderful and everybody should love it. It's like, who am I designing for? Who is going to use it? How long are they going to use it for? So for me, with a more technical mindset, I probably should have been an architect if I'd known differently. This was perfect. So after 4 years, I left that mill because they were in economic difficulties and it was becoming very difficult. At one point, they closed down, and I watched a lot of people working down in Georgia cry because they lost their jobs, at least temporarily, and they had mortgages to pay on their farms. So I said, okay. By this time, I had a lot of contacts who were offering me freelance work. So I said, okay, I'll leave the mill and I'll start freelancing, and then I'll look for another mill job. But the minute I started freelancing, I was so busy, I never had to go back to take another full-time job. I already had a Dobby loom. I had bought a used Dobby loom from somebody in Chicago before I moved to New York. And I got that through the old Handweaver and Craftsman. So HGA helped me get my first Dobby loom. So I had a Dobby loom. I had an 8 harness Maycomber, and just started going, and people would ask me to do things and I'd say, okay. And I'd show the samples. And so I've always seen it as collaboration, not creativity. You know, you start with your client's idea, and then you discuss it, you build up your own ideas, and then you just keep adding and learning along the way. So I just love that work.
We're having some trouble with your video, so we're gonna keep going and see if it gets worse. We may ask you to turn your camera off and see if that helps a little bit. So try turning your camera off, and
Sure.
let's see if that helps a little bit. And we'll put up images so y'all don't have to look at just me. Okay. All right.
Okay, I'm so sorry because it was working fine last week. So I
Oh,
don't know what's.
I know it was fine when we did the rehearsal, of
Yeah.
course. And let's just give it a minute, and then you'll come back and let's see if that's better. Okay.
Okay.
All right. I have to say that it never ceases to amaze me. I think I know people, and then I start doing a little research. You were full of surprises, what you have done in your life. And as I gathered information about you and your work, I was amazed at your participation in history. You were on the ground floor of a lot of digital weaving. You either participated in or was a spectator to the fascinating journey of digital weaving, integrating computers into weaving, and production and design. Were you aware at the time that that's what you were doing, that this was going to be so important later in life?
Well, I knew it was going to be important. Um, I was very honored. I mean, the whole connection to it came through AVL, which is the supplier of my looms. We developed a close relationship because within a year of opening my studio, I had 4 AVL looms. So we became very close. And I was also one of their very few customers working in the textile industry at the time with an AVL Dobby loom. So they invited me to come out to California to see their first attempt at a computer interface loom, which was designed by Tim Trudell, who's later moved to Canada, but he was a Boeing engineer and an amateur weaver. And so the first time I went out there, there weren't personal computers yet. There were a whole lot of computer parts spread out on a card table, and a lot of wires going up to a Dobby, and an early, CPU. So I typed in some designs of mine, and I thought, well, this is interesting, but this is not going to make me replace my mechanical Dobby. So they said, great, thanks for the feedback. They had other people who you may or may not know involved in this beta testing. So a year later, they said, oh, it's much better now. We're actually working with a computer. And it's a little faster, and come out and see it again. So I came out, and one of the slides that you showed in the beginning, those were things that were done for hospital curtains called cubicle cloths. They were very long, complicated Dobby weaves that were made into curtains to go around hospital beds. So the average pattern that I was working on then was 300 to 500 picks long. So that's what I wanted a computer, because 300 to 500 picks on a regular Dobby was, the bars went to the floor and back and they'd get stuck. So I went out and typed one of those into their new beta system. And that took about 20 minutes. And then it transferred to the loom immediately and it could weave. I said, okay, great, I'm getting one. So I ordered my first interface, and that was it. So suddenly I was the only person in New York who had the computer interface Dobby loom. So I became the demonstrator. So everybody came to my studio. So it was industry people, it was studios, it was the School of Visual Arts who came and said, okay, this is great. We need this, because School of Visual Arts was one of the pioneers in computer-aided design education. They said, we need to add this. I said, and the day they arrived, my Dobby wasn't working. I said,
dear.
how can I do that? How can I teach? This
Well,
isn't working.
let me interrupt for just a second. Let's go to that image you were talking about. Was it one of the first three?
No, this is a TC2. This is
Right.
very,
Was it one of, go back one, Mandy. Let's see if this is it. Is that the image you were talking about at the hospital? No.
What I'm seeing here is me at FIT. But the very first, the image before that.
Okay, I think this is it. I think you're a little delayed getting the images.
Yeah, this is the one.
Okay, good. I'm sorry to interrupt, but keep talking.
Oh, no, this is perfect. This is perfect because it helps people understand. It's the one in the upper right.
Uh-huh.
That's the first one that I typed in. And what it is, it's an imitation ikat done in a Dobby loom.
Mm-hmm.
So that was about 350 picks. And that was the first thing I tested out on the AVL Dobby. And I realized, oh my God, if I can do that, I can do anything. So that started this era of very large, complicated Dobbies. These are all 16 shaft looms, 16 shaft fancy draws. And it just opened up a whole world to me of things that I could do that weren't in Davidson or Marriott. Well, the Ebony Classic Weaving books stored. I was now into a world of creating things that fit my customers' needs, but also were allowing me to explore, things that really didn't have names. So that's what happened. So through AVL 1983, they invited me to go to Milan with them to show the computer interface Dobby loom. That was its introduction to the textile industry. AVL was the last wooden loom and the first computer interface Dobby to be shown at this international fair, and it was a really big deal, to say the least.
I bet.
So from there, it was just my name became affiliated with that, and invitations came to talk about it. And yeah, all I ever did was buy a computer interface. But apparently I explained it well enough that other people wanted me to explain, talk about it. So that's basically how I got started. I got involved in that. And then to sum up that period of my life, when I was in graduate school at FIT, my thesis is on that period of time. So if you really want the whole story, my thesis is called The Digital Dawn, and it covers this whole early computer interface world of woven textiles from both the industry side and the hand weaving side.
Oh, I think that would be fascinating. I think there's a book in your future.
Maybe.
Yeah. We try to get everybody on Textiles and Tea to do a book. So
yeah,
it would be good though.
Should
As you talk, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to ask if we should try the video again.
Yeah, let's try it and see.
Yeah.
Okay. The one thing I was when I was listening to you talk and I read some things about what you do, I was thinking that how being a pioneer could be really exciting, and for me it would be also frustrating, but I loved it that you stated that that if I applied to a course that you're going to teach, and you said if I apply to this course, I couldn't get in. Instead, I'm teaching it. I just thought that was a brilliant statement. So can you talk about a little more about how it felt to kind of be in this sea of new technology and trying to figure out which way to go with it? Oh, we may have to turn your video off again.
Wow. Yeah, well, that was the School of Visual Arts. That was it's not working again.
Yeah, we keep losing
Okay,
you.
also turn it back
Sorry.
on. So, oh, I'm so sorry, but I have been having yeah, blame it on my internet provider. They've been doing some strange things lately. So after Tim Binkley, who is the head of the computer design department at Visual Arts, came to me, I think it was in '83. He gave me 6 months. He said, well, we want this course. You're the only person who has this loom. You're the only person who knows anything about it. So we'll give you 6 months to write the course. And so I did my best, consulted with AVL. What do I talk about? This was on Apple II computers. And when I arrived at the course and looked at my class, there were teachers from almost every textile school in the East Coast and one from Washington State. Everybody else was a professor or a professional designer or a very, very experienced,
No pressure, right? No
no
pressure.
pressure. So, and none of them had any idea about computer-aided design, not even early Photoshop or anything. So the first thing I did was open up the computer and to show them that there were no moving parts. Look, it's all chips. So yeah, so my idea of teaching textiles through computers started there, and I'm still trying to refine how to change it because computer software has changed so much. It does when people talk about AI now, there's so much AI in weaving software already.
Oh, really?
Well, if you think of like how Fiberworks can, or programs like that can substitute blocks for you, well, that's a kind of AI,
Oh.
You used to have to do that yourself. So, and there are a lot of programs that will sort of run through algorithms to give you different patterns based on whatever draw and graph you have. So it's very different to teach to the program or to teach the basics of woven design and structure the way it was taught in the 19th century.
Mhm.
So yeah, I've been taught in a lot of places. Every group that I teach is a little bit different. The complex weavers always seem to understand what I'm talking about.
Well, I would imagine there's this huge shift because most of us, when we began weaving, like you, there was no computer. And I think, I don't know, like in my guild, I guess a majority of us are using a computer in some way or another. So I would imagine as you're teaching, it's shifting also, right? That you may not have to teach the beginning stuff like you used to, and
Well,
right? No?
at FIT, where I've spent, the last, 2 decades of my life,
Mm-hmm.
um, that's unique because you have students who want to go into the textile industry. So they're not coming in and they don't know which part of textiles they want. So they're going to study knitting, they're going to study weaving. And there we have weaving in two different schools. We have weaving in the art school and we have where they teach design, and my department, which is more industrial and business oriented. So I have to start out with students who know nothing. They have handloom experience, and then they work on a professional program. We've been working with Ned Graphics for for almost all of the time I've been there. So that's hard to explain to somebody who hasn't had the weaving background and the experience of warping looms and setting them up and doing their own things, to suddenly jump into designing for industrial production. So that's been a challenge. And it was even more of a challenge during COVID when suddenly we couldn't go to school and we didn't have our computers and we didn't have our looms. So
Yeah.
I learned to shift, and I taught the same course with I Weave It, Sally's program that runs on the iPhone. And we used Photoshop for jacquard design. And so I got some of the best work out of my students ever from the students who were sitting at home in their bedrooms with their iPhone program. So yeah, it was a huge, huge change, but it was still, it's the principles that count. I was teaching the same principles of design, the same principles of market research, the same principles of basic structures, but you just use the tools you have, you know. So I
Yeah,
guess
yeah.
that's what I've learned in all the years, is that no matter how much things change, weaving is still weaving, structure is still structure. And not everything that you do has ever been published before or has a name.
Well, this next image we're going to show, hang on. I apologize. My throat's really dry all of a sudden. That whenever I talk to some of the guests, we've talked about events that are like not necessarily aha moments, but they're big events that somehow change the course of what they're doing. And I thought this was an interesting example of this, where you were at the Museum of American Folk Art and you
Right,
were demonstrating how to design a coverlet on a computer, right?
right.
So take it from there. Tell us what happened from this article, which was your payment, right?
Yes, this is my payment. Yes, what I learned is if anybody ever says, we can't pay you, but we can put a story in the New York Times, say yes. What happened here was the Folk Art Museum was assembling a show on American coverlets. Beautiful, beautiful exhibit. And they wanted to update it to something that people who visited the museum would see as 20th century. So they heard about computer-aided weaving. They contacted AVL. Of course, AVL sent them to me. And they said, would you come into the museum and demonstrate one day how you would design for a coverlet today? So I said, oh, sure, that sounds like fun. And that's when they said, we can't pay you, but we'll run a story in the Times. I said, that's great. So this amazing photographer, I can't remember her name now, it was Sarah something, but she was a National Geographic photographer. She came into the studio, snapped 3 pictures. Of course, the cat got in. She became the most famous cat in the weaving world for a while. And they wrote this story, and suddenly this went everywhere. It went through the AP. So this versions of this story were going all over the country, all over the world. So then I start to get more invitations to talk, because it's all pre-internet. So it means, you know, going to conferences, doing workshops for guilds, whatever. More invitations to teach, including at FIT. But yes, it was quite an unexpected change. I just said yes to an article, and it was the best, most amazing experience to follow up and see how much interest there was in computers and weaving in the general public, because until this, anything I'd done was through handwoven or some weaver at Convergence or something like that, but not into the general public. I didn't really think of it as part of the craft world at that time.
Well, yay for the Museum of American Folk Art that they were thinking a little bit outside the box. That's wonderful.
Yeah, they were great. I wasn't the only person to demo. There were other people. I think they did it 3 times and they had 2 other people, but I was the lucky one who got the photographer.
Well, as it should be, as it should be. Well, you do teaching, you do research, you're exploring boundaries of the computer weaving, you travel. So, do you have time for your weaving, for your own creativity? So, what is your go-to if you have time to do a project, or what would you do?
Well, I mean, because I was all my years of working in industry, working on a collection was really my own work. The problem was that mostly it was woven at mill, so I was maybe hand weaving a prototype. But honestly, whenever I do have time to do something on my own, I'm most likely to weave a set of dish towels or a rag rug. So I go back to my Swedish roots.
What do you weave on at home?
um, at home. This is
Your
home.
studio.
I have 4 AVLs here.
So, You don't
running
have
out
a
of
problem
paper.
with having a loom there,
I have no shortage of looms.
but they're all AVL.
Four of them are AVLs. One is my lino loom. Lino is another very favorite specialty of mine. And the Maycomber has a really big shed and two beams, so it's fantastic for that. And I did a lot of lino for interiors at one time. And then at FIT, before I retired, they finally honored my request to get a TC2. So I consider that still act to it. So I'm dying to find a slot when the building isn't under construction and the students aren't using the loom, that I can go in and do some work on the TC2, because I've been following that since the very beginning as well. And but to invest in a jacquard loom of my own at this point in my life, but having access to one there and also at Parsons, where I do some part-time teaching now. Yes, so there's jacquard in my future and more rag rugs. All my old ones are run out.
There you go. There you go. Um, you went to Jamaica and worked with United Nations to develop establish a cottage industry there, right?
Right.
So would you tell us a little, we got a picture of one of your students. I'm assuming this is a student. And what is this loom?
Okay, that is an AVL production loom.
Ah,
This is another situation that came out of publicity, but it wasn't publicity for me. It was in Business Week, I think there was a story about AVL. So this is pre-computer,
mhm.
but there was a story about how this loom, this production loom, was making it possible for people to make a living as hand weavers. So there was a Jamaican business person named Peter Buckley who was on a plane in the States somewhere, and he read this Business Week, and he's at the time Jamaica had just gone through a big political change, and they'd been very close to Cuba under Manning for a long time, and Edward Seaga had just been elected, and really wanted to build up native industries in Jamaica. So Peter called AVL and said, I want some of those looms. Send somebody down to teach us how to use them. So again, they call me. It's like, okay, who's sponsoring this? Oh, the United Nations, that you need a United Nations Industrial Organization. I go, what? So just come down to Jamaica and see what's going on and see if you'd like to do it. So suddenly in February, I was in Jamaica from New York, where there's goats all over the street and lots of jerk chicken. And
Yeah.
I see the studio, and they haven't woven there for ever. I mean, they were putting together an organization called Things Jamaican, and they wanted ceramics, they wanted weaving, they wanted sewing. So they were pulling together a network of experts from around the world. So this person her name's Karen Watson. On that first visit, I visited the art school in Kingston and interviewed students, and Karen loved to sew. She was super talented. Didn't have any background in weaving, but I could just tell she was a fantastic person. So they paid for her to come up, and she worked in my studio, and I trained her to weave for a month here. And then the AVL looms arrived. I think we had 2 big ones and 4 small ones. And she went back and started to work with the people who are identified as weave trainees. And then I went down a few months later and worked with them the whole summer. And I went back over 3 years. I spent about 6 months in Jamaica going back and forth, and Karen was running it in between times. What she's wearing there is, the problem is Jamaica has no weaving history. So when Karen was here, we went to FIT's museum textile study collection, and we decided we would look at African textiles. And what she's wearing here is a cloth inspired by African kente cloth that we turned into a Dobby fabric. And this Karen designed and sewed this robe, but we also used it for purses, for placemats, for tablecloths. We had about 3 or 4 Dobby patterns that we designed together and turned into different products for this little shop that Things Jamaican ran. And yeah, it was a totally amazing experience, because what I really learned was how cottage, I'd learned this in India too, but in India I was just an observer, but here I was actually a participant in trying to build up an industry that people could make a living from. And that was a huge responsibility. It was more important than the design, was how to train people who have nothing, who have when I first went down, I brought a bunch of pliers with me and tools. And the next day they were all gone. And I said, guys, you can't take them out of here. They all needed them at home, so that they took all the tools I brought down and took them home. The next day we couldn't fix anything. So I said, okay, we need a check-in, check-out system for all the tools. And suddenly I really learned what poverty was and how learning a handicraft can change that. And since Jamaica, I've been a consultant. I've never been as intensely involved, but I've been involved with several other international projects that were similar. And I have a lot of friends like Carol Cassidy in Laos who have spent their whole life in another culture building up a real viable handcraft business that changed the lives of the people. So that's a very different way of looking at weaving. Yeah, and super important part of my growing up too.
Mm. Well, you have seen so much change in weaving, from, basic weaving to computerized and so on and so forth. So what do you think is the future of weaving? What do you think will be next for the weaving world?
Well, one is, I mean, what you're doing now, that the internet and Zoom has changed weaving so much. I mean, the availability of high-level teaching is incredible now.
Right, right.
Future of weaving as an industry is in very technical fabrics. Through FIT, I've worked on projects with MIT, with Cornell, with individuals who are using the jacquard loom to do prototype fabrics for industry, for space textiles, for all kinds of things that the average consumer isn't aware of at all. So weaving as a technical structure, weaving as a internet functional, fiber functional electronic component is very much with us now, and that's the direction research is going. So students who are getting degrees in college now are just as likely to get that degree in weaving from an engineering school or science department, not a craft at all. So fiber development is the other really important thing now, is fibers, looking for substitutes for our current synthetic fibers, and returning to all kinds of natural sourced fibers is another place that weaving is really important, is a way to develop prototypes and develop new products based on new fiber opportunities. So those are the two directions I've seen from my academic life and my professional life that are very much popping today if you read any technical textile magazines.
Well, usually one of the last things I ask is what's next for you. And so we're going to kind of combine it with another question. We have an image here of you at the Cooper Hewitt Museum for the Dorothy Leaby's exhibit, which I was fortunate to see. It was amazing. And they had you all come in and do demonstrations. And I heard it was a zoo. There were so many people that came, and you did such a beautiful job of teaching and showing these kids what it meant to be a weaver. So what is next for you?
Well, I have to give credit. This was a project, the Cooper Hewitt invited the New York Handweavers Guild, which the first thing I did when I retired from FIT was join the guild, which is an amazingly talented group of people, I have to admit. And they had started working on this project of just weaving like Dorothy. So I said, I have to be part of this, because Dorothy Leaby's, for anybody who doesn't know, was basically invented the career that I had of designing on a hand loom for the decorative textile industry. So I had a 4-harness loom, which I had never used, a 4-harness table loom. I said, well, this is perfect. It's folding Dorothy. I'd found it on the street and renovated it. And these are samples that were the one on the left there is actually my analysis of something that was done in the Libby studio, and the others were variations. And there were 7 of us from the guild who all had a table in this beautiful historic room. We opened at 9 o'clock. We closed at 5:30. We could never even take a lunch break. There were so many people coming that day, classes from Parsons, classes from other schools, people with kids, just weavers, people who know nothing about weaving, had just seen the exhibit and were curious. Best advertisement for having fun with weaving that could have ever happened. And I really hope to do more of this kind of stuff. And then also to do more work with guilds. In next spring, I'm going out to Seattle. Hi, any Seattle people are out there. I'm going to do a weekend workshop in weaving lino. So I see more short-term teaching, more writing for magazines. Sally, if you're out there, we have to talk. And just having more fun and just staying away from the rigor and the discipline of academia and helping other people find their way in the weaving world.
Well, you don't know this, but there's a sidebar going on right now between the Atlanta Guild, and we're planning how you're going to come and teach our guild. So the Chattahoochee Guild in Atlanta, put it on your calendar. We're going to have you come see us.
Yeah, I see me out there.
We want you to come. I want you to teach me your lino. I think that would be amazing.
Yeah.
And then I think there's some people that have some looms. They want to talk to you about that too. So we have tons of questions. I don't know if we'll get to them all, but let's try. How about that?
Okay.
Okay, I think we're going to have to turn your camera on. Let's try it again, because so many people have asked about your necklace. You got to tell us about your necklace. All of the things you've done in your life. They want to know about the necklace.
The necklace, yes, it really is sewing machine bobbins. It was made by a jewelry dealer at a flea market that I go to during COVID when she couldn't get out to markets. So she started putting together this bobbin necklace. And when I saw it, of course, I actually had to buy it, of course, but I asked her to make more. I said, everybody wants this. I literally have had people cross the street to say, are you wearing what I think you're wearing? But she said, no, I'll never make another one. It took too much time. She does make them with 3 or 4 bobbins, but she'll never make another one like this. So it's one of a kind. And you can make it at home if you have 2 months.
Bring it to Atlanta. We want to see it. All right. Well, we got rid of those. I think like 3 people asked about that.
It's really hard to get the plug.
Oh, we're gonna have to turn your camera off again. Doggone it. Yeah, here's at least 3 people who are asking about the bobbin necklace.
See, all this weaving, all anybody wants to know is about the bobbin necklace.
I know. It ain't right. Let's see. Oh, somebody wants to know. Here we go. We're getting back to you. Betty Womlock wants to know, is your thesis available online? Is it on your website or anything?
It is, if you have access to academic lines, it's on ProQuest.
ProQuest.
Okay. On ProQuest. It
All
might
right.
be other places, but I'm not sure if you have if you're in academic circles, you can get it.
Okay.
But I'm pretty sure it's available. I'm pretty sure you can get into ProQuest without being involved in an academic library.
Liz Adams wants to know, what was the year? Do you remember the year that you did the demo at the Museum of Folk Art?
I think it was 85 yeah, I think it was 85.
Okay.
I'd have to go back and read the date on that newspaper article.
Oh, Ramona Abernathy Payne wants to know, is your lino hand manipulated or dupe?
Dupe. I only do dupe lino. Well, I have done hand manipulated dupe, but dupe is what I teach. Yeah. And I've been teaching it for decades, but not too many people have picked up on it. I keep trying.
Who was the this is from Mimi Anderson. Who was the person from Washington State who was in that first class?
I honestly don't know her name. I'd have to go back and look at it because I'd sort of forgotten it, but it was somebody who was a professor at the University of Washington, and I ran into her 20 years later, and she said, "I was in that class." I said, "Really?" I was so in awe of everybody that I forgot who was in that class. I know Carol Westfall was there from Montclair, and oh gosh, like somebody was there. I can't remember which teacher from Philadelphia, but it was pretty intimidating.
I can't imagine that. Yeah, I think that would be unnerving. But it's also amazing. And then actually, this happens so many times on Textiles and Tea is that these people will come on that I'm in awe of, and they'll talk about being in awe of other people, and it just blows me away. It's like I can't imagine you being intimidated by anybody for what you've done. So those my two cents worth. Um, this is from Ellen Hess. Please comment on the different perceptions and names of weave structures by industry weaver designers and hand weavers. So I think she's asking, what do you use in industry? What kind of structures?
Okay, well, Ellen was in my second class.
Oh, hey, Alan.
I don't know. And we teach in different departments at FIT. She teaches in design. Something simple like overshot, which every weaver understands. In industry, most people probably have no idea what that means. In industry, you start with your basic twill set and, plain weave, and then you start building up complexities based on those. But at least in my works with mill, the only language
We're losing you again.
that was paper. So in my teaching the industry students, their complexity, if I'm working with consulting with some MFA students now, I will reference the books that they're reading. So if they're reading about Samate or Tekate or anything that weavers are familiar with and specialize in, then I'll use that structure. But in industry, I find that those terms are not that useful.
Somebody has just posted about an interview you did with out in Colorado,
Right,
a Zoom, the Unstable Lab out of Colorado, which
right.
I'm surprised you don't teach there. That seems to be right down your alley. I watched that video also. It was amazing. So if you want to Google it, it is a wonderful interview there, and you talk more about the history and that sort of thing. So I do encourage people, if you want to learn more,
Yeah,
check that out.
that was based on my thesis. I presented that at a conference for Praxis, and
Oh,
Laura
right, right.
Devendorf,
All right.
we presented it in Colorado.
Um, Karen LeBlanc wants to know, she'd love to hear more about who you design fabrics for.
Okay.
Name dropping.
Well, my main client as a freelancer was a company called Fabs, and their main clients in the contract industry, which is office and technical fabrics, were Arcom, Maharam, and Design Text. Forrester Fabrics, another company that specialized in hospital textiles, Standard Textiles, who specialized in hospital textiles, and then P. Kaufman, a well-known converter, not a mill, but I worked for P. Kaufman for many years, did a lot of collections for them. Bloomcraft, I mean, if you go down the who's who of who did anything in the home textile industry, I probably did something for them at one point or another. Just as again, as part of a collaboration, not as named collections or anything, but just part of the team that developed collections for them.
Susan Nestle says, was it Pat Sparks? I'm assuming we're still talking about Washington.
Okay. I honestly don't know. It's been so long. I don't really sorry, I don't remember.
Oh, that's fine. That's fine. We could go on forever. I could hear more of your stories. It would be amazing, but you just need to come to Atlanta. That's all there is to it.
I would
So
love it.
we have to stop for today, though. I'm sorry to say. Thank you so much for being on here. I'm going to try to save the comments because everyone is just applauding your your session today. Thank you so much for being on here, Patrice. It was wonderful. Sorry about the internet problems, y'all, but that's technology for you. Do appreciate Patrice being on here today. We want to thank her, her sponsor, the Weaving Friends. Thank you guys for doing this. This was so nice and so supportive. And we appreciate you doing this. And if anybody else wants to gather together and sponsor someone, please do, just like we did for Patrice today. I encourage you, if you, like I said, if you want to learn more about Patrice, go check out the lab out in Colorado. That was an interesting video. You'll learn more. And it's just amazing everything Patrice has done. So thank you all so much. Thank you, Patrice. Thank you, Weaving Friends. We do appreciate it. We are still gathering funds and donations for celebrating our 200th episode. Now we're at 202 now, I think. And we've got 42 people who have donated. You can see their names on the side. Thank you one and all for donating. $200 to celebrate 200 episodes of Textiles and Tea. And even if you don't have 200, anything would be wonderful. $5, $10, whatever you have. This keeps Textiles and Tea on the air. It keeps us keeping us going, finding wonderful episodes like we had today. So we thank all of you who have donated. And if you're interested in donating, please go online. You can give us a call, weavespendie.org, and you can donate to help celebrate that we are 200 plus episodes. And that's over 12,000 minutes of listening to people like Patrice. It's just amazing. It's wonderful. We also want to thank everybody who have donated or taken out a membership. It's another way that you can support all the programming, because our programming happens because of your donations, whether it's Textiles and Tea, Careers in Textiles, Spinning Weaving Week. Through your donations, we're able to keep these programs going, and we're still looking at what are we going to do next? What's going to be our next program? So thank you all so much. And if you would like to sponsor, donate, or join, please do so at weavespendie.org. If you've missed any episodes, we encourage you to go back and watch them again. You can go to the website and click on the episode, and you can watch it through Facebook. We also upload them to YouTube, and you can go there. If you do like watching them on YouTube, be sure you subscribe, because if you do, then you'll get a notice every time we upload a new episode. And we try to do those within a week or so of it being aired. So thank you all so much. Today was incredible. I really enjoyed talking with Patrice, and we are going to have Natalie Boyette next week. We're excited to talk with her. So thank you all so much. Have a great week. And again, happy tea.